Hello, welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework tutorial series. And this is tutorial 4, Host Your Client-Side Web Part from Office 365 CDN, aka HelloWorld Part 4. So this continues with HelloWorld series where we created already our solution, we modified the web part, we also tested the web part in a SharePoint page, and now in this tutorial we are then packaging that web part for a final deployment without any local host with optimized code and all of that. Now, this is September 2018 edition. We keep on evolving these tutorials based on the new versions of SharePoint Framework. Before we actually go to the actual tutorial, just a quick note on the default settings of these things. So Office 365 CDN is something which is free for you to take advantage as part of your Office 365 subscription. It is not enabled by default, and even though it would not be enabled, your web part can be automatically hosted by SharePoint using the app catalog side. And we'll come back on this one as part of the tutorial discussion. But Office 365 CDN is a really nice way of optimizing performance automatically without any additional complexity of adding and hosting your files in a separate CDN. And this is a capability which was introduced as part of SharePoint Framework 1.4. So if you've gone through these tutorials before the 1.4 version, the story was slightly different. You were still forced to use an Azure CDN or an external CDN. That is not, however, anymore required, and the whole hosting is completely automatic for you for your solution. Now let's actually get moving on the solution packaging and getting stuff deployed. So first of all, if you are moving or coming directly from the tutorial tree, you definitely want to break the terminal so you don't actually have the local hosts running, so we're able to double check that everything is working properly. What we want to do first is to make sure that our setting in our Office 365 tenant is already enabled. So I'm going to start PowerShell and a PowerShell window. So here we go. So a familiar PowerShell window with the blue background and everything else. And in my case, I already installed the Office 365, the SharePoint Online Management Shell to my machine. If you haven't installed SharePoint Online Management Shell, you can either do that using PowerShell Gallery, or you can download an MSI and get that one installed to your machine. Now, the next thing what we want to do is that we'll connect to SharePoint Online Service. And then we need to provide the URL of the tenant where we are actually hosting. So in my case, we're hosting or connecting sppmp admin at sharepoint.com. So to the admin URL of the tenant which we want to configure. And when I'm hitting enter, it's going to ask me to sign in using my tenant administrative account. So let's actually do that. There we go, and signing in. And hopefully remembering my password properly. Yes, I did. So now we're connected to the tenant using SharePoint Online Management Shell. And now we can get the situation or get the status of the Office 365 CDN by running get SPO tenant CDN enabled, and then a CDN type public. So by default, we're using Office 365 public CDN. And if I run this one, it's going to actually give me the status of my tenant related on Office 365 tenant or public tenant setting. So in my case, the setting is already enabled. That doesn't really matter from a tutorial perspective, but you really want to make sure that the public CDN is actually enabled, and you also have the needed SPO CDN origins. So let's actually double check that one as well. Get SPO tenant CDN origins, and CDN type is the public one. Really the key point here to concentrate is that we have client-side assets and star.client-side assets entry available, because this one will make sure that your assets included inside of the sppkg file are being served through the CDN automatically. Now, if for a reason or another you do not want to use Office 365 CDN, which is free for you to take advantage, your assets can still be packaged inside of the sppkg file, and the URL would just look slightly different. So we would serve those assets directly from the app catalog side, not directly from CDN. I'll come back on that one in a slightly later on this tutorial. Now, if my setting would not be actually that it's enabled, I would be doing somewhat following. So we would do set SPO tenant CDN enabled, CDN type and public, and that's going to make sure that the settings are actually enabled in my tenant. Now, the public CDN means that the JavaScript files are available anonymously from your tenant. So the JavaScript files, it does not mean that any content or any assets or any other files are being served anonymously from your tenant, but this is only for serving your web part files anonymously from your tenant, so the browsers can access those as efficiently as possible. So let me do yes for that one. So now we can actually see the files of content type CSS, EOT, GIF, ICO, GPP, and so on stored in the location configured to serve public CDN origins will now also be served and cached in the content delivery network. Such content will be then accessible by everyone anonymously, not monitored nor covered by Microsoft content policies. And that's a really important thing to realize. And I'll come back on to policy discussions in a second. But what we really want to make sure, if you're using the CDN, that entry does exist there as well. If you have enabled Office 365 CDN way before, like when it was actually G8, it might be that this entry is not available. Whenever you run this command, set SPO tenant CDN enabled CDN type public, that's going to make sure that all of these three default origins are available within your tenant. Now, this means that our settings are basically available. Now, you might have a situation where there would be, right after this, it is saying configuration pending message, and that means that the configuration of enabling the CDN is still in progress, and it might take up to 15 to 20 minutes to actually enable these origins within your tenant. So if you enable the CDN first time by looking into this tutorial, go and have a coffee and come back in 15 minutes, and then you are able to continue finalizing the solution for deployment. Now, good. So let's go back on the solution structure. And let's actually close that one, and let's have a look on quickly our solution and package solution JSON. So really the key point here is that we have include client-side assets attribute, and this is the one which was introduced in 1.4 version of SharePoint Framework. When this setting is true, it means that JavaScript files which are in the dist folder are getting also packaged inside of the sppkg file in the SharePoint solution folder as part of the packaging. And you can actually see those files or nearest JavaScript files getting packaged here in the debug folder when we compile our or when we repackage our solution for shipping. So let's actually do that. So let me go to the command line. Here we go, and let's do gulp bundle and ship. We're prepping our solution for shipping. So we're going to bundle that one more time. Basically, we're minimizing JavaScript files, we're optimizing the code, everything else. So there's a few different tasks running behind the scenes right now. And then we want to do gulp package solution -- ship. And that's going to then make sure that we are actually taking that include JavaScript assets inside of the SPP package setting into account, and we're repackaging the sppkg file. So that file has been now repackaged. So let's go and quickly double check that one also from a debug folder perspective. So now if we have a look on the debug folder, there's a new client-side assets folder in here, which actually has the HelloWorld web part JavaScript files and the HelloWorld web part string files. So basically exactly these files which were in the dist folder previously. So these are the ones which are included inside of the sppkg file. So you don't have to manually serve them anymore from a separate location. Now let's actually reveal again this one in Explorer. There we go. There's the solution. It has been just compiled. And let's actually open up our app catalog. There's our HelloWorld web part, and let's actually drag and drop sppkg file on top of it. And because the solution already exists, SharePoint is asking, do we want to replace? And yes, we do. And now we can actually see that there's a pretty big difference on the file. Well, not a massive difference, but there's an important difference on where the content is now being served. So the content is now being served from SharePoint Online. And the reason why we say that it's SharePoint Online is that now, depending if the Office 365 CDN is enabled, we will either serve these JavaScript files dynamically, automatically from Office 365 CDN or from the app catalog. Key point here to notice is that we were not forced to update any URLs, we were not forced to define any URLs where the JavaScript files are being served. So we included the JavaScript files and assets inside of the sppkg file, and then Microsoft is automatically serving those files based on the tenant settings. So let's click deploy. And that's now getting or has been deployed. So now if we go to the group site, if we create a new page, let's go and quickly check out our console. Console isn't running, so that should be fine. We add and scroll down, we can see our Hello World, and our Hello World is getting rendered regardless of the local host not being actually executed. So everything is running properly. And what's important here is that if I open up the dev tooling, and if I refresh that one more time, so we can actually see where the file is getting loaded. And now if we go to the Networks tab, if we go to the Sources tab, we can actually see that there's a public CDN, SharePointOnline.com, and there is a URL where the files are actually getting loaded. A key point, and that's actually really interesting as well, so that is actually the same URL as your app catalog site, but it's under the public CDN URL. So now, if your Office 365 CDN is not enabled, you will see directly a reference to this application catalog site collection. If you have an Office 365 URL enabled, you can actually see that the assets are getting downloaded from the public cdn.sharepointonline.com URL. But that's it. Now we have a sppkg file in our consumption, output directly from our solution, which contains all of the needed assets. So you don't have to manually host any files anywhere. You can basically just send this JavaScript sppkg file to anybody, any of your customers or any of your friends, and ask them to test the file within their tenant, and everything will work because every asset is included inside of the sppkg file. But that's it for this tutorial. So what we did here is that we finalized and we packaged our solution for actual deployment. We included all of the client-side assets inside of the solution, which was the default setting in the package.json file, as we have the include client-side assets here true. Technically, you can set this one to false and then update serve JSON file and update your write manifest JSON file with the CDN path base path to manually point to an external CDN. But the key point here is that you don't have to. You can do that. That's still an option. But by default, every single asset is automatically getting packaged inside of your solution file. So you can actually just deploy sppkg file and everything works from your tenant. Thank you for watching, and that was the final piece of the HelloWorld tutorial series.